Hello and welcome back to another episode of the Debatable Discussions podcast. You join us today for a very exciting episode and something that is perhaps a little bit different to what we usually discuss. Yeah, yeah, yeah. And and on top of that, hundreds and hundreds of thousands of views across social media. Yeah, it's not that long. Yeah, yeah. And more. Yeah. So, Dan, you mentioned there at the start of the podcast, and to sort of when people ask me why we started debatable discussions and how importantly, I tell them about chemistry and they're always very confused, and I tell them I really enjoyed chemistry for the 2 years I did it at GCSE. In fact, it was my favorite science because most people, because from chemistry, Diane and myself, we both got grade nines at GCSE. So we were very delighted from that end product to chemistry. But equally with that as well, perhaps, we founded debatable discussions sitting next to each other in chemistry. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah, and so it was an amazing moment in that lesson. And I think for anyone young listening, it's really bizarre to say, but seating plans can have a huge effect on your life because it did for us. The fact we were sitting next to each other meant we started debatable discussions. And that's just the sort of luck and opportunity that luck sort of gives you, I suppose, in life. Just the random chances. And so we said, why don't we start a podcast? We went to a teacher's office straight after. And at the time, it seemed absurd in a way, because looking back at us now, we were 16 years old then, or really just turned 16. We had the biggest exams of our lives, our GCSEs coming up. And this teacher said, why not sort of do it? So we released about 6 episodes, I think it was. Um, 6 episodes that did really well, actually. Yeah, yeah, education. Yeah. And actually something that I'll always remember from starting the podcast, I think for the rest of my life, is on that day we started it and we said we'd do it. I went back to my room at school and I had two friends in the room and I said to them, slightly hesitantly, because I didn't know how people would react when I said this. I said I'm thinking about starting a podcast. Um, and I sort of phrased that as a statement, sort of slightly unsure what they would say. And their enthusiasm for me to start it was what I remember. Both of them, I remember saying, "You should do it," they said, and definitely I should start a podcast. And I think that will always stick with me, actually, just having really that enthusiasm behind me when I started it. Perhaps, I don't know, I didn't think people would think it's, I don't know, the cool thing or something. I don't know. And I suppose it certainly wasn't. But I think that backing that I received, and then a few people initially that helped us, was really helpful at the start of the journey that we've had for the past 2.5 years. Yeah, 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 yeah. Yeah, and it was amazing you said that, Diane. And I think the thing I most remember from the new episode is that we've recently, as you can see, only 2 days ago, did a rebrand. In the first episode, we did a name change, which is even more significant. I think we started our podcast as Coffee Table Conversations. It's an awful name, but we kept. I think it gave us the idea of alliteration, which helped with debatable discussions, I suppose. Um, but a question I've got for you, Diane, we've done 81 episodes of the podcast now. You mentioned there that we've nearly received 10,000 streams and hundreds of thousands of views of clips on social media. If there's one episode to you that will stand out, what is it and why? Okay, yeah. Okay, yes. Yeah, 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 too. Yeah, 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 yeah. Happens a lot. Yeah, 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 yeah. Yeah, huge, the huge gulf. Yeah, yeah. I think for me, I've got two answers. I think firstly, I've got two episodes that will really stand out to me. The first one is Ryan Wayne, the first time we recorded with him, which was our second season, episode one. And what was so special about that episode was that it was the first guest episode we ever did. And we started the podcast probably being a bit brazen, a bit bold. So we emailed the biggest. And in that case, it meant that we emailed Tony Blair. Obviously, I think Tony Blair was dealing with some far greater matters at hand, but unfortunately couldn't give us an interview. So the Institute said they'd almost give us his right hand man in many ways, Ryan Wayne. And I remember being so excited when we got our first guest. I think a common trope of podcasting and perhaps in general with trying to interview guests is you send so many emails and everyone says no. Obviously, Ryan Wayne didn't say that. He agreed to come on the podcast, which was fantastic to have him as our first guest. And he was really generous in that sense to give us his time, not only once, but twice. And then Anthony Scaramucci, I remember being probably about 10 years old or so and seeing him on the news. And I'd always remembered his name since that moment where I saw him on the news, being interviewed as White House press secretary. Really, probably at the start of when I became interested in politics, sort of 8, 9 years old. And so it was absolutely amazing to be able to interview him twice. Not only was it perhaps advantageous or beneficial from the amount of awareness and attention he brought to the podcast, but actually to interview someone of his notoriety was fantastic. And it will be one of the most memorable days of my life. Last year, it was over a year ago now. We were in London in a studio interviewing him, which was amazing and an amazing experience. Leanne, a lot of people have always, I think what's been hard with our podcast journey, perhaps, is balancing recording episodes with schoolwork. Uh, for those who don't know, we are 18 years old. We've just done our A level exams. So we've been on this quite long journey, perhaps over the 2.5 years, not only with podcasting, but also with education. So, how would you say to someone listening about how we've managed this, or perhaps the hard moments that have emerged trying to balance schoolwork and exams and also hosting a podcast? Yeah. 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 Uh, yeah. Yeah. I don't as well. It's enjoyment. Yeah. 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 Yeah, and you mentioned there the flexibility, which I think we've really had to incorporate doing it alongside school. And admittedly, it's been difficult sort of releasing perhaps episodes, having to stay up quite late in evenings to do so. But I think we've tried to achieve a healthy balance in which we definitely haven't felt at all, either of us, that we've taken away from our studies to do this. Not at all. It's really actually been complementary to them. Not once has it felt for me that it's been taken away from my work. Um, so I think it's that flexibility and balance. And also, we've had an amazing network of people, not only guests that have been very helpful, but also some of the guests that are perhaps slightly closer to us in many ways. You mentioned Daniel, who's been really helpful as a recurring guest. Some of our other, perhaps more younger guests, you could say, are people we've known from school. And similarly, James Hewins, who helped us with the podcast for a while, someone who was really, really helpful in helping us manage the podcast. So we've had a really amazing network of people to help not only run the podcast, but contribute to the episodes. Yeah. And actually, Dan, that links to my next question, sorry, about the future. There's been lots of updates, and I think I'm interested in history, and I think there's one thing and that I always see there, which is that innovation can easily translate to success. So, what is perhaps the next steps for the podcast? But yeah, yeah. And as you said there, Diane, I think the website really for me, as we've discussed it over the past sort of few weeks, is almost the written version, you could say, of what's on our minds, what we're thinking about. So Diane, you're is sort of going to be leading the film section because you like film and things like the Odyssey, I suppose, have been on your mind. Um, and you've just travelled, so that's been on your mind, or animal ethics has been. And similarly with me, I visited the Tate Modern, as you said, and that's sort of I've been thinking about it. So it's almost our thoughts translated into the written word. And I think that's what's really nice about it. It's just things we find interesting, or things Daniel or many of the contributors would find interesting. Yeah, critiques. Yeah. Yeah. And I think that wraps it up nicely, the episode. A sort of a journey of our past few years. We've released 81 episodes of the podcast, as you mentioned there, Dan. Views and sort of, I think, figures that have really pleased us and made it something that we want to do in the future. And I suppose the website is only just the next step of what will be perhaps an exciting few years we've got with it. So I'll speak soon and see you at the next episode.